Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy.
Okay, so today we're discussing Carl Panzram. I'm not 100% sure if I say his name right because it's a German name. So we're going to call him Carl because that's his name there. So his little run of criminal activities in the 1920s, he's born in June 1891 in Minnesota. And he's an American serial killer, rapist, arsonist, robber, basically career criminal during the early 1900s.
All in all, a good guy.
Yeah. So he might have been an elusive killer and a child molester, but part of his trend through his entire life is he is a horrible thief. And by that, we're going to go through, but he's arrested a bunch of times, like in excess of at least 9. He uses a lot of different aliases. So in the 1920s, it's not really that easy to piece together who he was and when over all you figure county or city jails, stuff like that. They weren't all linked to be able to look up how many times he's been arrested. So, and he wouldn't know, he lost count, and let's face it, he's dead anyhow. So,
right.
And I don't feel like that's a spoiler alert.
No, I feel like 1920s. Yeah.
So, anywho, so Carl, his parents, John and Lizzie, were German immigrants who owned a farm that was not a successful one. Carl was the oldest of 6 siblings. He had 5 brothers and a sister who, strangely enough, all grew up to be honest farmers. So why he deviated from that path, I don't know.
Yeah, it's that whole nature versus nurture.
Well, it's interesting him being the oldest too. So I don't know.
Maybe they were harder on, I don't know.
I don't know. So this is another case of starts early on. Carl was considered a delinquent at the age of 7. And they attribute that to it's also when his dad abandoned the family. So then it's him and 6 siblings and the mom doing her best. So Carl starts being delinquent at the age of 7 when his dad abandons the family. And then about a year later is when he's first arrested. So at 8 years old, he's arrested for drunk and disorderly.
Wait, what?
Yes. And I don't find that funny, but it's just like 8 years old, drunk and disorderly.
Okay, so that's one of my kids. Like, that's your little twin is 8. I can't imagine her getting arrested for drunk and disorderly. Okay.
Yeah. So he moves in onto his disorderliness and starts burglarizing neighborhood homes where he'll steal like cakes and candies and stuff like that. And he does steal a revolver. And then when his brothers find this out, they all 5 of them beat him unconscious, which I thought was pretty crazy to begin with, because I don't know why, but when I read it, I kind of pictured teenagers. But mind you, he's like 8, 9.
But he's the oldest.
That's what I was like, how is that even possible?
That doesn't, the math doesn't make sense. So you're telling me a bunch of, okay, so wait, he's one of 6, right?
That's I figure since this is in the realm of no birth control, they've all got to be like 10 months to a year apart, whatever the actual ability to conceive.
You said there were 5 boys and 1 girl. So he's got 4 brothers that just beat the crap out of him. But even if they're 7, 6, and 5.
That exactly.
Well, whatever. Okay.
So I was just like, oh, right. So at age 11, he's arrested for breaking and entering and is sent to Minnesota State Training School, which is the Minnesota Reform Institution. So basically like the juvenile detention center. A Christian school? And he claims this is where he was first beaten and sexually abused by like the teachers and everything. And he also claims that this is where he first murdered someone, but that is not confirmed. So this is like delving down the path of it's hard to verify some of his claims just because the time that it was in, and if it wasn't reported, how do you say whether or not it was true or not? But he claims he murdered a kid there, and that was when he was 12 years old.
Oh gosh.
Now, when he's in the school, it is a very strict institution, which obviously, if they're trying to reform these bad juveniles, that's probably where the whole discipline and everything. But he had very little education, so he couldn't read well, and he would get in a lot of trouble for not doing things. But I think he started being bad or anything like that to kind of cover the fact that he didn't know anything or he couldn't do his assignments because he can't really read at the level they thought he could, which would lead to punishment because he's acting out. So this is 2 years in to his time there, and he builds a crude bomb and burns down the school workshop.
Lovely.
Yeah. Now, mind you, he's about 13 years old and claims that these 2 years he's being beaten and sexually abused and murders one of the boys that's there. Now, I can see
it kind of makes sense that he's escalating because his abuse is escalating.
Yeah. So while he's in this place, obviously there's other bad kids that are there. So he kind of learns to become a skilled liar, and is able to convince the school that he's reformed and is returned back to his mom and the farm. So I don't know if they returned him back to the farm because I would think after he burns down the workshop, and I don't know if he burned it down and they just didn't know who did it, but I find it hard to believe that they would know he did it and then send him home.
Yeah, that seems kind of suspect.
So I feel like he's now claiming that he's the one who burnt it down. But at the time, I don't feel like they did. But anywho.
Yeah, that makes sense. He's just trying to make himself sound bigger and badder than he was.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, he's going to have a pattern of arson, so it's possible that that's the first thing he set fire to.
Okay.
And then you also figure if he was being raped there, burning it down, I can kind of understand where that hate and everything's coming from. So he returns back to the farm and refuses to work the farm, and he tells his mom he wants to be a priest. So she sends him to a nearby church to start to learn priestly ways. So he gets over there, and he's all this time he's kind of built up starting to hate authority anyway because he was always getting in trouble. He doesn't like being told what to do, which I figure is a little bit on the norm for a 13-year-old anyhow. But he takes a gun to school and plans to shoot his teacher in the head in front of the class, but drops the gun during a struggle with that teacher and runs away. So
that teacher was lucky.
Yes, because that could have been the first person
he officially killed.
Yeah, officially killed. So 2 weeks later, he hops a train and becomes a drifter. And this is really...
How old is he? He's 13?
Yes.
Okay.
So he doesn't want to get in trouble for that, I guess, or he's afraid he's going to get sent back to that reform school.
Mm-hmm.
So he hops a train and becomes a drifter, and that really begins when he first becomes a transient, because that's really his lifelong. He's all over the globe. But during this 2-week runaway stint, he's gang raped by 4 hobos, and that traumatizes him, and that's when like the hate and rage he has really starts to bubble. He's now getting picked on yet again. It's like a pattern of he's always the victim. He keeps getting raped by everybody, and he's just really hating humanity.
That poor kid.
Yes. So since his way to survive is burglarizing places, he naturally gets arrested for burglary and is sent to a Montana reform school, which obviously didn't reform him. So I don't know if any abuse started or just because the last reform school was so bad that he wasn't willing to attempt to stick it out, but he escapes with another inmate. I don't know if you want to call them inmates because basically what they were doing with juvenile offenders. So whether you want to call them school people, mates, whatever. But those two meet up and begin a crime spree of burglary, robberies, and arsons throughout the Midwest. Now, mind you, he's about 14, 15 years old doing this with another pal he met in the juvenile detention.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Now, they're primarily targeting churches, and after they would burn them down. So that's where the whole I could believe where he burned down the school workshop because they burnt down the churches that they were robbing.
Makes sense.
And I also think it's interesting. Yeah, I also think it's interesting he was stealing and burning churches down because if it was a Christian academy that first, or not really academy, but a Christian reform school that really started the beating and sexual abuse that made him have a disdain for humanity, that it's interesting to me that they start targeting churches and burning them down.
Yeah, that's interesting. At least he's kind of channeling his rage the right direction. Like, not really, but kind of, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Like you can see some sort of pattern of makes some sort of sense. Right. Well, so then the two part ways. I'm not 100% sure why, other than they just decide to go their separate ways. Carl lies about his age and joins the army. And now he is far from a model soldier and is free.
If he doesn't like authority, why the hell would he join the army?
I don't know. It just
doesn't make sense to me.
Like, so now it's noted that where he did get in plenty of trouble for being subordinate, and he's jailed for minor offenses. He excelled with like weapons and stuff like that. So they did note that they did see potential leadership in him. So I feel like had he found the right leadership, maybe he could have been corrected at a
more productive in life.
Yeah. But he's found guilty of larceny and they dishonorably discharge him, and he's 16 years old.
Oh,
so
God.
He gets sentenced to 3 years hard labor at Leavenworth in Kansas. And I'm going to briefly take a pause on him for a second because I had to look up Leavenworth and just find some background on that because I just thought it was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is in 1908. Leavenworth was first being like put together in the 1900s and had its first inmate in 1903 and was under construction during that time. So they set up like...
Can you imagine being the only prisoner?
Well, I don't think it was one, but like
still,
the first
you know what I mean?
official inmates were in 1903. And they were housed at a temporary jail down the road because now I didn't know this, and I'm sure people who live there or know the history of Leavenworth probably do, but those prisoners that were first official inmates in 1903, they built the prison. So that's why they weren't done with construction until 1926 when they'll say at Leavenworth the penitentiary was officially done. But that's because, so like when Carl gets sentenced to 3 years hard labor at Leavenworth, he's helping build the jail. Which I was like, that's kind of both fucked up and an interesting way to have manual labor.
Yeah. Creative.
And now Leavenworth, never been there, but the walls are 35 feet for the surrounding the jail. And they also go 35 feet in the ground.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I was like, I kind of want to go see it just because that's insane to me.
That's huge. How do you even dig that out?
I was trying to figure that one out too. The only thing I could figure is like
Not like
maybe
they
it
had a
was.
backhoe.
I have no earthly idea because that's 35 feet below the ground.
No wonder it took them almost 2 decades to do it.
Yeah, well, I imagine they were building more than just the wall, but I was just like, oh, okay, that's a serious jail to build.
Yeah, that's some heavy duty shit.
Now, from Leavenworth even being a thought, it's been known for violence and having both the toughest criminals and the toughest guards.
I mean, if you're going to have tough criminals, then I feel like you have to have tough guards. So,
yeah, it goes hand in hand. But mind you, they just sent a 16-year-old boy there. Now at this time, I don't know how old they think Carl is, because obviously if he lied about his age, they don't think they're sending a 16-year-old boy to a place where the toughest criminals. Like, it just seems like, okay, this is going to be the start of not good things. So he's obviously 16 years old, so not a whole lot of muscle, not a whole lot of know-how of defending himself. So naturally, he gets into Leavenworth, and the guards hate him because he doesn't want to listen, and he just pushes the boundaries at every opportunity. When he's first there, he's beaten by inmates. He's raped regularly. So it's just like between the guards and the inmates, he lashes out any way he can. Anytime confrontation with an inmate, he will fight with all he's got. So he starts to build like a reputation of, I don't know, admiration almost. So the guards would beat him on several occasions to the brink of death. And then assume that the other inmates would finish him off, I guess, but they don't. And then they start to almost like cheer him on when he does have confrontations with the guards. So they kind of stop messing with him.
I mean, I guess that's good, but not.
Yeah, there's also where the guards would place him in a straitjacket and tighten it until he passed out. And they did that several times. Just to try to break him, I guess. Now, towards the end of his sentence, because mind you, he gets 3 years, so he's coming up on the transitioning from being a scrawny boy to this adolescent is doing hard labor, so he's building muscle, he's getting taller, and getting to the point where towards the end of his sentence, the guards start to kind of give him a wide berth, because now he's 6 foot tall and about 200 pounds of muscle.
Holy shit.
So hard labor and food, and just he's a bit of a beast. And towards the end of his sentence, he would seek out the inmates who would initially rape him when he was first there. And then they don't really say what he did to them, but I would imagine he probably struck the fear of God in them.
I mean, yeah, that's a beast of a man coming after you that you pissed off.
Yes. So, and he would brutalize and rape anyone who tested him. So again, the guards would kind of, I don't want to say they tiptoe around him, but they stopped.
They definitely clenched.
Yeah, like they would avoid pushing his buttons. So it's just they kind of were creating a monster to set loose on the public. So after his sentence is up, he kind of returns to his life of drifting, where he commits burglaries, rapes, arsons throughout Kansas, Texas, Oregon, California, Washington State, Idaho, and Utah.
Good Lord.
And this is under like several aliases. There's a plethora of them. They list 10 that it's just, so this is where it gets into the realm of trying to run down his stories based on how many times he's been arrested and where and under what name. It gets so much of a spider web of things that it makes it more believable of what he was doing and all of that, because he was different people and all of that.
Right.
And part of me is kind of curious if he kind of went that way of different aliases and moving around because he had such a hate for not only himself but other people that he was just reinventing himself everywhere. I could be off the mark because he really doesn't stay anywhere very long. So it could just be a cover for him and his crime spree.
Yeah.
But so he, in one of these instances, he takes a job as a bouncer at Colonel Dickey's Wild West show.
Woohoo! Yeehaw, buddy.
Yeah, the problem was he ended up fighting nearly everybody who was employed with the carnival. And at the end of that little job bit, a horse bumps into him and he punches the horse out cold.
Oh my
Now,
God.
this entire Wild West show depends on the animals and their well-being, obviously, is essential. Not to say if they weren't essential, it'd be worth punching a horse out cold. But Carl...
It's not like the horse body checked him on purpose. I mean, come on, man.
And he's a big dude, so you move yourself. But Carl was determined to get revenge since he was sent packing, and he comes back late one night and sets fire to the tents with the cooks in it and the horses in it. Now, the staff wake up to the sound of the distressed horses, but the fire's too engulfed, and everybody basically just watches the inferno, and all the animals die, and there's too much damage, so the carnival also dies along with it.
It's horrible.
So just to put into perspective, this dude he's crazy.
He's a lot of crazy.
Yeah. So he gets caught stealing and is sentenced, this is in 1915, and he's sentenced to 7 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary, where he's constantly beaten by the guards and sent into solitary confinement, where he says they did not feed him and he survived on cockroaches.
Yeah.
I don't know how accurate that is. I feel like he probably did eat roaches. Maybe they only fed him once a day, because I don't feel like cockroaches to sustain a 200-pound man.
No. Maybe they were starving him to make him lose some muscle mass.
I don't know. But he's just basically, he's so confrontational. That's where it's just like a lot of the times he's put by himself because he cannot be with other people. All he does is fight. So in 1917, he escapes, but is immediately caught and returned. Doesn't learn a lesson there. Escapes again in 1918.
Wait, not to get completely sidetracked, but when was he born?
1891.
1891. I thought, okay.
Oh, no. So when I first started, I was saying that his reign of terror is between 1920 and 1929.
Gotcha.
I just wanted to give the behind the scenes of before he starts officially full on murdering people, of what kind of led up to things. And it's just like, I really feel like those 3 years of hard labor at Leavenworth were what really built him into a giant muscly machine. And now he's this huge man that towards the end of Leavenworth, I think I skipped this one, but towards the end of Leavenworth, he had gotten beaten so many times, got to the point where he wouldn't even react when the guards would beat him, which is, I guess, what lost the appeal, rather. So then they kind of left him alone. But so you figure when he left Leavenworth, he's in the mindset of he's going to fuck anybody up who tests him. And now that he's gotten beaten so regularly, he clicks off to it. So it's disgusting to think of somebody enduring as much. And then now they're set loose on the public.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So when he escapes in 1918, now he's big enough that he's no longer the one who's going to be assaulted. He's going to be the one who is the aggressor. And this is when it starts, instead of him being the one who's raped all the time, he goes forth and selects his victims. So he makes his way to New Jersey, or not New Jersey. He makes his way to New York and joins a number of different unions and gets a seaman's ID card, which allows him to join a ship, the James S. Whitney, where he travels to Panama and plots to steal a boat. Now he ends up.
Of course he does.
Yeah, so that's what his big scheme is. But then he ends up traveling to Peru and works as a coal miner.
Man, he really got around.
That's where I thought it was crazy. Like, he is world traveled, which makes it even harder to, when you're trying to track somebody's crimes. It's just like he's changing names, he's changing countries, like he's all over the place.
Yeah.
But the workers go on strike, so he decides it's time to move to Chile. So he moves to Chile, and over the next few months, he decides to travel around and find somewhere else. So he doesn't stay in Chile very long. I kind of feel like he might not stay in some of these countries very long because language-wise, I don't know how, for somebody who's uneducated in English, how he would be able to survive in countries if he doesn't know the language.
Yeah, it's a language barrier.
So he travels in the next few months to Port Arthur, Texas, London, England, Glasgow, Scotland, Paris, France, and Hamburg, Germany. So it's just like, it's crazy how much he traveled. But now he's about 28 years old, and he's basically surviving by just stealing and, with brief jobs. And in the summer of 1920, he decides he's ready to go back to the United States.
Enjoy.
He breaks into, now this is unintentional, when he breaks into this house, he didn't know whose house it was. It ends up being former President William Taft's home in New Haven, Connecticut.
Oh, gosh.
Now, the irony of this one would be when President Taft was the Secretary of War, he was the one who signed the paperwork that sent him to Leavenworth. So it's just like, it's just crazy to me that he breaks into
circle.
Yeah, exactly. So he steals a .45 caliber gun that he does later use in several murders, and then $3,000. He uses the money he gets from other stolen goods, all that he's been saving away, and he ends up buying himself a small yacht, and he names it Akista. It's Akista. I'm not sure how you say it. And he begins cruising the East River, where he burglarizes other yachts and rapes and kills soldiers. He rapes and kills sailors he hires as his crew, and he just dumps the bodies in the ocean, which is another way of, how do you prove that one? They're dumped in the ocean and probably never found. So,
or if they are found, they didn't have a way to really identify the bodies. So
yeah, and now that he's got his own boat and he just sails around, it's even easier for him to make his way places. So he sails to Africa, one of these exploits, and he says that he rapes and kills a young boy there. His brains, this is a quote, his brains were coming out of his ears when I left him, and he will never be any deader.
That's disgusting.
Yes. So fortunately, in August, his boat sinks in a storm, and he's resorted to traveling by land. So I don't know how much he would have murdered and killed if he would have kept a boat, but at least he's now boatless. So
divine intervention.
Yes.
It's like, sink that shit.
Well, he's in Africa. He's arrested for burglary and possession of a loaded gun, and they give him 6 months in jail. Now, when he's released...
Which seems like nothing compared to Leavenworth.
Right. So, mind you, he's doing all these aliases. So I think a lot of the times when he's getting arrested and getting these light sentences, it's because they assume this is the first time he's gotten arrested.
Yeah.
So, and even if he would have given them a real name, whatever happened in the United States, I don't think anybody in Africa would have been privy to that information anyhow. So He
Or really,
serves,
even different parts of the US. Like he made it from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast.
yeah.
And I don't know if they really had a great way of communicating, but
Well, that's what I was just. It seems like one of those. Obviously, you couldn't get away with this today. But he gets out after he serves those 6 months and then stows away in a ship headed to Angola, which is a Portuguese colony on the west coast of Africa. He gets a
okay.
job as a foreman on an oil drilling rig for Sinclair Oil. And during this time, he rapes an 11, 12-year-old boy and bashes his head in with a rock.
Oh my God.
So then he decides he's bored with that and moves to Libido Bay
Sorry.
and hires and hires 6 locals to help him crocodile hunt, because naturally when you're an oil foreman your next job should be crocodile hunting.
He's just trying to find his path.
So when the crocodiles appear, he shoots all 6 of the crew and throws them overboard to feed the crocodiles.
Of course he does.
And then he decides now he's done with that, he's gonna flee to the Gold Coast and begins robbing farmers. During that, he decides he wants to go to the Canary Islands. But he gets there and he says there's nothing worth stealing, so he decides to stow away in a ship headed for Lisbon, Portugal. Now, I'm not
Man,
sure.
he gets around. Good
I
Lord.
know. Every time I read, it was really hard to track the little shit because it's just like, he is just, oh, talk about a trail of crime.
I mean, I that's an insane amount of traveling.
I'm exhausted just reading it because it's just, he's all over the place,
Like,
literally.
and he's not
And
even like settling down. He's going places,
no, yeah, that
assaulting little boys, which by the way,
and
I
stealing, like,
realize what he did, what he went through was like horrible for him, but at some point you have to grow up and move forward. And he had the complete choice. Like, I get it, the whole crime spree, but to go around raping little boys is just that's horrible.
I
Like,
think it turned into like a power thing. He was so much a victim, is that now that he could victimize other people, it gave him that strength of where he could brutalize and go on, and no one's the wiser. And he just goes. He really could have lived a whole lot longer of a life doing what he did than what resulted. Um, But I also don't know why he had to stow away on ships at this point, because when he was originally being part of the crew, I don't know why he had to be a stowaway.
maybe because he
But
didn't want to work.
that could be it, because it would seem that he would never work anywhere for that long of a time. So it's almost like he did not find it. Uh, I don't know, what do you want to call it? He,
Rewarding. It was
yeah,
not rewarding work.
Yeah, he didn't want to be doing things. I guess he didn't want to be bossed around either. And unless you own your own business, and even then, I mean, you got to answer to somebody at some
Yeah.
point.
Well,
But
even if you own your own business, you answer to your customers.
yeah, so it's just like it. And he also, you figure he's got all that rage and hate from everything else that's built up, that he really can't stay anywhere because he doesn't have friends. He's not a nice person. He's an asshole. But anywho, so he stows away for a ship headed to Lisbon, Portugal. And then he's forced to flee from there when he finds out that local police are aware of his crimes in Africa.
Ooh.
So he
I wonder,
decides
I
in
wonder how they found that out.
my guess would be he was the ship that he was on. Maybe he inadvertently hopped one that also had been wherever he just was. And if you figure people, I don't feel like anybody found the people that were eaten by the crocodiles because they were eaten, but you figure it's got to be worth traveling news that if a 12-year-old boy is bashed to death, that's got to be one of those that the word spreads of the horror of that. And I think
And
because,
I don't think there were very many 200-pound, 6-foot
yeah,
men just strolling around.
I don't know, but I think that's why, since he was hanging out in ports, hopping ships, I think that's how, when he caught wind, that it was like, okay, so maybe get away from the ports. So in 1922, he decides it's time to come back to America, where he continues his robbery, his rape, and arson. And of course, when he gets back to the States, he decides to rape and kill 2 young boys when he gets there.
Of course he does.
Now, he wasn't even caught for that shit. He's caught a year later in New York when he's trying to rob a train depot and is sentenced to 5 years, which to me still seems like not a lot of time.
That's not a lot of time.
But he's sentenced to 5 years in the Clinton Correctional Penitentiary, which is also known for being a brutal place to be. Now, it's also a place where guards are known to inflict abuse and torture inmates. And Carl tries to burn down their workshop, and he also tries to kill a guard by clubbing him from behind. The guard does not die. But shortly after that, he tries to escape by jumping over the prison wall. I don't know how tall the wall was. I do not believe it was a Leavenworth kind of wall, because scaling it would be hard. But he lands on concrete on the other side and breaks both his legs and both his ankles, which I probably shouldn't have laughed at that, because I feel like it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. But I shouldn't have laughed. But it takes 14 months for him to get medical treatment.
Oh God.
And don't feel sorry for him, because it doesn't
But
stop.
still, that's a long time.
It is. But once he gets his medical treatment, he immediately goes to raping inmates. And they have to place him in solitary confinement. So it's just like, really, really, guy? Maybe he needed to keep with his limp. Now, he's released from that sentence and now does have a limp and goes right back to burglaries and strangles a man during a robbery in Philadelphia, and is arrested in 1928 for that robbery and is sentenced to 25 years at Leavenworth.
Oh gosh.
Which is why I say that it's weird that he helped kind of be a part of the building, and you figure Leavenworth has only officially been fully constructed 2 years prior to him getting arrested and sentenced to 25 years at Leavenworth.
Wow.
So it's just like, I can only imagine. I mean, again, not feeling bad for him, but knowing how bad the start of Leavenworth was for him, knowing he's going to go 25 years. I hope he was scared shitless, although I don't think he was.
No, I don't think he was either. But like, I feel sorry for him, like when he was younger, because he was like a mini monster. But once they put him there, and
Yeah,
they
created
a monster because he got caught stealing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And look what he turned into, like
a muscle-bound killing machine with
raping.
absolutely
Yeah.
no sense of just. Ugh.
He had no moral compass in any way, shape, or form.
No. So naturally, he tries to escape when he gets to Leavenworth. He's unsuccessful and he is beaten unconscious. The amount of times in his story that he's beaten unconscious, it also makes me curious if his brains weren't a little scrambled also.
Yeah.
But a year after being in Leavenworth, he kills the laundry foreman by beating him to death with an iron bar. Now, for that, he receives the death penalty. And then, so he goes to death row and starts telling the guards about how he's killed kids. And authorities start to get wind of this and start to connect crimes and check it out, where they're able to confirm only 5 of the 21 murders he brags about. But again, it's one of those, it's worldwide. So where you talk about the 6 guys that were fed to the crocodiles, if you can't verify where they died and there's no bodies, that I don't know. I mean, it's whether you believe him or not, I guess.
Yeah.
But he ends up befriending a young guard. His name's Henry Lesser, who takes pity on him, hearing the stories of basically his creation of this monster. And I really think this is probably the only friend Carl ever has, because it just seems like he keeps kept running into people who either abused him or he abused them back, kind of scenario. But for whatever reason, these two develop a friendship, and Lesser actually gives him $1 for cigarettes, and Carl seems to respect Lesser. So during these stories, Lesser gives him a paper and pencil to write his life story, which, side note, when I read that, I was like, this guy's going to die. He's going to get a pencil to the temple.
I was just about to say, does he kill him with the pencil? Because that's going to be really fucked up.
But no, he actually, in 1929, he starts writing his memoirs, rather, and he gives them to Lesser, who could not find anybody to publish them, by the way. So he ends up donating them in the 70s because everybody thought his story was so gruesome and detailed and disgusting that nobody wanted to publish it. So, but rewind back to...
There's enough twisted true crime junkies out there. Hello. That would read that shit now.
Yeah, well, you can if you want to. But so in those memoirs is where he claims he's murdered 21 people and over 1,000 different acts of sodomy on boys or men over his lifetime. And in his little memoirs, he says, for all these things, I'm not in the least bit sorry.
Nice guy.
Yes. So he has a year to write his memoirs before they hang him in 1930. And his last words were, "Hurry it up, you hoser bastard. I could have killed a dozen men while you're screwing around." So
he's an asshole to the end.
Right up to the bitter end. Now, I know at least for me, we're thinking, why did he just target men? And now he'll say he's not a homosexual, but I kind of feel like he was. But he'll say he's not. But the reason he stayed away from raping and doing whatever to women is that early on he contracted gonorrhea from raping a transient woman in Colorado. So from then on, he saw females as unclean and only targeted men. And now I'm also not sure if it's also a case of he was brutalized by so many men. That's why he targeted his revenge on men.
Yeah, I think it's more on the revenge side of things.
Because I personally feel like the whole, if he finds female unclean, a dirty butthole is not any cleaner. So that logic didn't make sense to me. But mind you, he's not a very educated individual, so that made sense to him.
Yeah. Or it was a good scapegoat for him.
Yeah. Now, mind you, there are several different books you can read on him. They do cite some of his works because, like I said, that guard that befriended him, he couldn't get anybody to publish his memoirs, so he ended up donating them to San Diego State University, and then you'll have people who will use those writings in other books to almost not translate it, but just pick it apart of his stories, and again, whatever you want to believe. But he'll tell you that he doesn't care if you don't believe it. Whether it happened or not, it happened. So I kind of feel like he probably did kill a bunch of people and sodomized plenty of people, because just the way he traveled and raped people, that just the ones you know about and the things that he did in jail, I don't see a problem in believing him.
Yeah, but I think if there's anything to not believe, maybe it's like maybe instead of 6 people he pushed over, it was 5. You know what I mean? Like, but
Yeah.
even then, I don't see the point in exaggerating because you've
Well,
done
and
enough messed up stuff to enough people that we got it. You're a psycho.
yeah. So now one thing that was interesting is so when he killed that laundry foreman and gets the death penalty for that murder,
Right.
human rights activists tried to interfere with him getting the death penalty, but he actually scorned them and told them that he'd murder them if he had the chance. So I think that's one reason why he went from murdering somebody and then a year later he's hung, that he wasn't trying to get away from that sentence, to which to me almost says he still had so much self-hate and maybe even being a man that I don't think he cared to die. So I really don't think when he was making that hurry up thing to his executioner, that I think he wasn't scared. He almost longed for death. I think he how long he went with insignificant sentences are crazy. And then to think when it was just larceny that sent him originally to Leavenworth, I think that was a very harsh crime for a very young person
Oh, yeah, harsh sentence.
and to a harsh place. But on that same token, I suppose when they were sending him to reform schools, those were supposed to be nice. They weren't. But it just escalated in the sense of he wasn't getting what he needed.
I also feel like way back when, until more recently, they felt like a kid that was out of line just needed a good ass whooping.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the reform schools were necessarily supposed to be nice versus whip the kids into shape, literally,
Well, that's
and
where it
instead it broke
depends.
them.
Well, it depends if you believe his version of that during his first reform school when he was 11, 12 is when he first is raped.
I mean, I feel like there's no point in he gets assaulted so many times that
I yeah. I just
like
think it's one of those things of when you can take that trauma and either grow from it or I guess become what you hate.
so I honestly think the only story that you've told that I don't necessarily believe is him being 8 years old and beat unconscious by 4 younger brothers.
Yeah. So I thought when I read that, and I was like, if he's 8 years old, I find it hard to believe like a posse of 6 year olds, like 6'5", 4. I don't even think once you get below 5, I don't think that they would give a shit. Was found at the neighbors stealing. Like, I don't care what generation it is. I don't find a 5 year old wielding anything.
No, they're going to be sitting there like, oh, I'm going to tell mommy.
Yeah.
Not, I'm going to jump you with our brothers and beat you unconscious. That's stupid.
No,
That's,
I could have
I think
believed it
that's,
maybe at 13, but even
no,
then, he's
because
the
even then he's the
oldest.
older. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I still don't see a 10-year-old jumping, like, even if they're 9, 8, 7, and 6, or let's just say they're all the other brothers are 2 sets of twins and they're both as old as humanly possible and like close in age as Carl. Like, I still don't see,
Yeah.
that just doesn't make sense.
Now, I wouldn't be surprised if obviously he becomes a skilled liar when he's in that reform school. So obviously he's telling the story way later in life and after he's been a liar. So I wouldn't be surprised if just now that he's getting attention from somebody that he embellishes the story, because what's it matter? He could have said his whole family raped him. Who's to say that they didn't?
Right.
But I did the
I'd be
whole what?
I'd be curious what his brothers think of that story he's told. You know what I mean? Like, did
I
they even
feel like
dignify it with a response, or are they
I
just like, "Oh, that wasn't me. We don't know
I
him. He's not
oh,
related."
I feel like that's what I would do. I'm like, nope,
Good
nope.
to know.
Oh, sorry. Awkward. Well, you go on a 20, well, no, a 9-year raping, murdering, arson, spree, I will unadopt you. Not that I adopted you, but unfamily you. Wait, I'm cutting you out. You're out of the will.
Disowning? Thanks, Carol.
You, Andrea. Ironically, I'm reading my notes where it says, can't read too well due to little education. And I can't come up with the words myself. Not to jab at Southerners. They might talk slow, but they ain't stupid.
Oh, gosh. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind-fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.